Welcome everyone to the Way of Soul Remembering podcast. I'm delighted to be with Guru Dharam here. And in this podcast, this is really a wonderful place where we give people opportunity to share more about their spiritual life, their experiences, and inspire with what they've learned. Um, I know Guru Dharam because he was one of the main teachers on the Kundalini yoga training that I did. That must be like, I don't know, 8 years ago now, and he always seemed like a very interesting and experienced teacher and man. And I'm really, inspired to have a space with him here where we can go into some really interesting topics. So maybe just first, Gurudhar, maybe are you able just to introduce yourself a little bit to the audience, who you are, what your practice is, your kind of background? And maybe one interesting thing that I always like to ask people is, what was your like original way in to the spiritual life? How did it kind of emerge for you?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. I am a doctor of Chinese medicine. I'm a Kundalini yogi. My main interest in all of that stuff currently is actually teaching yoga as a one-to-one therapeutic modality. But over the years, I've done a lot of teaching people to be yoga teachers, which, as Tom said, that's where we first connected. And I've made various different forays into forms of energetic healing, some of which I practice and some of which I don't. So, of course, after 30 or 40 years, you kind of create a sort of a composite of modalities that seem to suit you. My original way into all of this, well, my original way into yoga was actually straight into Kundalini yoga. But it's fair to say that my first sort of, if you like, awareness of spirituality or me as a sort of spiritual person actually came from one of my teachers when I was at drama school, who sort of said, "Oh, you know you're a healer, don't you? Come over here, I've got a headache. Put your hands on my head, will you?" And I was kind of going, "What? You know, what's happening?" Did it. She got better. And that kind of started something in my own mind that was like, that was the beginning of the trail of breadcrumbs kind of thing.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And so how old were you then at drama school? You must have been quite young.
I was quite young, yeah. I was 21, 22, that kind of age.
And did you relate to yourself as like a sensitive person? Did you sort of feel is that generally the way people saw you at that time? You know, like a
Well, I
good
did.
energy person, the type of person that might have healing capacities.
Well, my nickname in my teenage years was Peace. It's what
Oh
people
wow.
used to call me. So maybe that gives us a clue on that one, Tom.
No, that's really nice. It's interesting, these connections. I remember at school, like one girl said to me once, she said, we were talking about what future careers people would have. And she said she thought I would end up being like a wise man sitting on the top of a mountain, giving people advice.
Amazing, isn't it?
Right, yeah. So our main kind of connection is Kundalini, and it is a topic that people are very interested in. It's a form of yoga Guru Dharma and I both practice and teach. And but it's a mysterious thing as well. And I would really be curious to hear from Guru Dharam. You know, obviously it's a massive area and massive topic. But if you were sitting next to like a really earnest seeker, on a coach, on some journey to India, and they were like, Guru Dharam, what is this Kundalini all about? Like, what is it? How
Yeah,
do you, like say, how would you describe it? How would you kind of present it to somebody?
yeah. Well, I'd sort of describe it something along the lines of Kundalini is the um, the inherent creative potential of the individual. I'd sort of talk about it in terms of an image as being like a kind of like a sort of a coiled circuit of energy that exists in every person, but in most of us it tends to be dormant. How can you awaken it? Well, any and every form of yoga will end up by stimulating, activating the Kundalini energy. Of course, there's at least 20 classical forms of yoga, and now, of course, in our modern material age, there's sort of endless varieties of, if you like, branded yoga. But the purpose of yoga is to awaken, stimulate that energy so the person can experience something of the totality of their potential of being human. And then that would sort of segue into an interesting discussion in terms of, well, can we in any way quantify that potential? How, is it measurable, and in what form? And then we kind of go into this idea of, well, the way yogis see human beings is they see us, if you like, as as embodying a polarity. And that polarity is, on the one hand, being finite, and on the other hand, being infinite. And so there we've got a really nice paradox. Well, how can we both be finite and infinite at the same time? And the answer to that, of course, is that, well, we're finite in relation to the fact that we have our, Shakespearean 70 years and 10. And then, we shuffle off and that's it. On the other hand, the essence of me and the essence of you is what in Kundalini we would call the soul, or the soul body. That is what gets reincarnated over and over and over and over. And so that process of, if you like, ongoing and continual reincarnation takes place within the parameters of infinity, if that in itself isn't another contradiction. And so we say that, well, within the infinity, then our journey is to go life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth. And as you'll remember, Tom, we call that the cosmic cycle. And that cosmic cycle is expressed through the sound current, Satanama. Infinity is life, death, rebirth. And the idea is that by meditating on that, it takes away our over-identification with or fear of any of those aspects of the cycle, so that we can, if you like, be as free and as liberated while going through that cycle as we possibly can.
That's a really interesting and comprehensive. Yeah, that's you've really touched on some deep areas there. So we're talking about kind of the we experience ourselves as having limitations. We experience ourselves as having limitations, like life has an end point of death. But you seem to be pointing also to a sense of a potential for a human being to experience something like hugely expanded consciousness, potentially beyond what they're used to in their life.
For sure.
I think that sometimes what I find really interesting about the spiritual life is, although I do sometimes have peak experiences, when I sort of feel like, oh, it couldn't get better than this. And then later, then a few years down the line, I have another experience and I feel like I didn't know what I was talking about before, or that it just seems like a sort of process of being kind of reborn into sort of fresh awareness.
Yes.
I really like kind of the feeling of being able to experience life in a completely sort of fresh way, like when I'm around other people, my partner, and there's this sense of like, I thought I knew them in a sense, but maybe I didn't know them at all. And I think there is something really special about the spiritual life that can give people that capacity to experience life in a very fresh way. I think that is connected somehow to this feeling of kind of expanded expanded awareness that goes beyond the kind of limitations of our, whatever words we use, our egotistical mind. Is that also the sort of area that you see as being kind of connected to the Kundalini sort of experience?
Very, very much so. And, that expression, being born into fresh awareness, is, I describe it as being an accurate sort of description of what we do. And, it's rather like you choose a practice, you do the practice, and your experience of the practice, of course, is slightly different every day you do it. But it's rather like our experience of being our own self, of course, is radically different, say at 10-year intervals. Go back to, how did I think? How did I look at life when I was 20 and 30 and 40 and 50? And it's rather like, well, you are a completely different person. It's rather like the whole process, if you like, of biological maturity could and should come be accompanied by a essentially spiritual evolution. And one can only guess at what that might be when we're in our teens and 20s and 30s. And it's only after a couple of decades perhaps of experiencing how we develop and how that development is, if you like, how it resonates with our spiritual development and our spiritual practice. Now, as you know, at any point we can have a peak experience. Thank you. Once we've had that, when is the next one going to happen? Well, you don't know. It's rather like all you can do is, as we say in Kundalini Yoga, keep up. And that intention and that, if you like, spiritual energy creates a wave, the wave creates momentum, and that gives you a direction on the path of light, or as we say, the path of Dharma.
So what you've just said there about the wave has just sparked off this feeling within me. And because I remember I was once talking to a guy who was much more into kind of Tai Chi and these forms. And I was talking to him about Kundalini Yoga, and he was like, oh, you need to be very careful. You need to be very careful. Because he said, all this talk, which it can seem like this when Kundalini is presented as bringing the energy up to the crown chakra. And I do think there is something, there is something in Kundalini to do with, I'd be curious about your perception on this, of kind of awakening almost like the dormant parts of the brain in some kind of way. But he was like, you need to be very careful because you need to make sure you don't kind of have too much rising energy up in the system and not enough water. So he was like, in this sort of Tai Chi tradition, they talk about fire and water and this sort of balance between that. So how can we kind of approach Kundalini in that way of having both the kind of the strong and the hard, but also the soft and the yielding sort of aspects of our practice?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, if you look at if you like, the entire spectrum of practice within Kundalini, at one extreme you'll get, if you like, very high energy, dynamic, active, projective practices. But at the other end of the spectrum, you'll get the softest, gentlest, most gentle, still Vipassana style of practice. Now, it's entirely up to you which you choose, and ideally, of course, there is going to be a balance. But the point of comparison, I think, would be that yes, the idea of Kundalini is that there is more attention given to the mix of prana apana, and then sending that initially downwards to the first chakra, and then up through all the 7 chakras, ultimately into the crown. But then you have what I call the Roman candle effect. It's, yes, you're supposed to send the energy up, but then you're supposed to, if you like, direct it and feel it kind of titrate down through the rest of the energy body to be regathered. So you end up with the circulation rising and then falling, rising and then falling. And this whole image is mirrored very much in what the Taoists call the microcosmic orbit, in which there's the energy of the midline in the front of the body and the energy of the midline in the back of the body. And that needs to be, if you like, sealed at each end. So at the perineum, at the bottom end, and at the sort of the upper gums and the upper palate at the top end of the body, to create a circuit and a flow. And this is the connection between, if you like, Kundalini and Tai Chi. It's all about flow. With perhaps a slightly different emphasis on, okay, boys, how are we going to get the energy moving? Because once it's moving, then it's quite easy to direct. The difficulty is getting it moving.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful practice that I think has the capacity to bring us really into a more kind of, I don't know what I would describe, like a kind of original, sort of natural awareness in some sort of way, like a very fresh, natural, expanded, curious, playful, almost like a childlike state in a way of kind of curiosity and kind of wonder in life. And you know, not that I take these things that often now, but sometimes on my Kundalini journey, it reminds me of what it's like if you're on like a plant medicine or something like that. That kind of like vivid, fresh, curious sort of wonder of existence. And one of the things that I'd also like to kind of bridge into a little bit is that I have an interest in practices like lucid dreaming, astral projection, and I'm just wondering also about how your experience of those sort of practices and how you sort of weave it into like a kind of holistic whole between physical yoga, fresh connection to the physical, beautiful world, but also like a deep curiosity about the subtle realms. Because sometimes, or although it's a little bit of a misconception, sometimes when people hear about people interested in lucid dreaming, astral projection, it can feel like, oh, just kind of like some sort of escapism into some other sort of world and disconnected from this world.
Yeah.
What's that been like for you on that sort of journey of having kind of both realms vividly kind of alive? And
well, I think you mentioned the elements earlier in our discussion, and this is if you like, a very good example of how the elements relate to different aspects of metaphysics. Astral projection, of course, is, if you like, traveling from this dense physical realm of the earth element and going up and out into and through the air and into the ether element. So, you know, the subtlest and most fine. And we can talk about the ether element as being essentially the dream space. So my interest in dreaming is quite strong. So I spent a few years working primarily with the Toltec form of dreaming, and a little bit with the Tibetan notions of dreaming. And in fact, I teach a 6-day course called Dream Medicine. I would say that it's certainly possible that, you know, anybody who's sort of interested in yoga has got a slight misconception that, oh yeah, this is all about escapism. But it isn't about escapism at all. Actually, it's about integration. But it's, let's say that the element of ether is much more alive and pertinent to everyday experience of some cultures, and much more in some cultures than others. I would think that the capacity to dream lucidly and to take conscious creative action in the dream space, and then, if you like, bring it back down to the material realm, is a an absolutely authentic and effective form of spiritual practice and discipline.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely resonate with that. That's the way that's the way I see it. But it's good to kind of present it with that kind of sense of wholeness, of connection between the two worlds. I mean, I believe in the kind of spirit world and the sort of journey of spirit there and the journey of the soul. And sometimes I have amazing experiences, say, with ancestors, my gran or my auntie that have passed over, and they're very cathartic experiences for me. They're very meaningful, but they're also meaningful for my alive physical family when I sometimes and come back and say, I talked to Auntie Audrey and this is what she was saying, and this is what she wants to offer, this is what she's thinking about, and she's got this whatever, this communication for you all. So there is that wonderful connection between the world of spirit and the kind of the more etheric or the ethereal sort of spirit subtle levels, and also this physical world. And it's really important for me to kind of I want to be like an ambassador an ambassador.
Yeah.
Well, ambassador that is an authentic and meaningful part of spiritual practice.
Yes.
I mean, it's not something, you do need to make sure your feet are on the ground with these things and sort of have a way of but at the same time, I wouldn't want to limit my spiritual practice just to the kind of, meat and bones of the physical world.
Well, I think the purpose of spirituality is to remind us and give us direct experiences that, yes, while we tend to exist mainly in the dense physical realm, of course, all of the other elements have their place, and if you like, patterns of consciousness that are associated with them, and that it's rather like anybody who is attracted to yoga. Whatever it is that we think we were first attracted to yoga, and looking back on it, I can't really remember why it was. It's just kind of late 70s. That's kind of everybody either did it or tried it. So I did too. But I know, looking back, that for me personally, it was a wonderful way of developing a more authentic and real practical relationship with my own emotions. So it's rather like yoga is a way of integrating all of the different aspects of ourself, and, as it were, teaching us how to keep, if you like, one foot in the material realm while having the other foot very comfortably in the etheric realms.
And have you ever had any kind of teachers in the spirit world? If you kind of, when you're journeying there, are there beings that kind of come through and they'll say, this is important? Or sometimes, people have these guides for a period of time in their life. Have you had that?
That's right. It's more like that for me, that someone or something will jump in at a particular time. I have had a couple of, if you like, longer term guides, and when I do, I try and sort of maintain a kind of communication with them for as long as they're around. So yeah, that's very much part of it, and of course that's something that people are always interested in: spirit guides, power animals, these kinds of energetic manifestations that are there to essentially assist them.
That's true. Actually, my email address that I was giving to Guru Dharam, maybe we can work out later, actually has a spirit animal encoded within it. Maybe you'll be able to work out what this anyway. So no, that's really nice to kind of go into these areas of kind of the spiritual life. And do you access these realms just from the kind of waking meditation, or is it through this? Because often I have these sort of experiences in the early hours of the morning.
That's right. Well,
between sleep and wake, and then I go through what we call the vibrations, and then kind of journey from there. Is that how you do it, or do you just do it straight from sort of
I
awakening
tend,
meditative consciousness?
mostly I do it from a space of uh, meditation and meditation practice. It's
Mm.
rather like, you start out learning one of these forms and say, I suppose journeying, shamanic journeying through usually drumming or something, and you're in lying down on the ground. So, corpse pose, as we'd say in yoga. But, with years of practice down the line, then it's not that you can kind of switch it on or switch it off at will,
Mm.
but it sort of gets close to that. And
Yeah,
so
but
sometimes I'll sort of know, okay, I need to do this particular practice to get in the state. Sometimes I need to lie down, put on that tape, or I
yeah.
need to go for a walk in the forest and do it, make the connection that way.
Mm. Mm. Okay, so I do also really like to bring into these chats a space for just practice, and I know listeners also enjoy that. Do you have like sort of 5, 6, 7 minute practice that you could offer? Do you have one that we could kind of be guided into?
Yeah, sure. Let me just see if I've got tape of this handy. Yeah, we'll do a practice. Here we go. So as I said, I think I've used the word once or twice, integration. Yoga is all about integration and sort of coming to terms with all that we are, and then taking appropriate action to, if you like, begin a process of evolution, progression, change, or what have you. This practice uses a mantra, and the mantra is Har, Har, which is a mantra of manifestation. And when you're using a mantra, it's often important, and it is in this case, that you sort of pull the navel point when you chant. So hard, hard, hard. And in that way, you bring into the practice the third chakra, the navel point. And because the navel point, the third chakra, is the tip of the triangle between first, second, and third chakra, by pulling on the navel point, the third chakra, you also indirectly bring in the energy of chakras 1 and 2. So this means you're calling on your own internal base that we call the lower triangle of chakras 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to bring in the higher triangle of chakras 7, 6, and 5, because the fifth chakra is at the throat, and therefore what you say, what you articulate, what you chant, what you project from the throat is the collective energy of the higher triangle. So it's another way of connecting lower and higher into one energy. Mudra, hand position, will make a interlace all the fingers together, like so, and then we'll put that behind the neck, like so. That's it. Then you make sure your spine is nice and straight. Lock your eyes at your third eye point, at the brow point, and then begin to chant Har in time to this tape, pulling your navel point. We'll go for about 4 minutes. And inhale and hold. And slow exhale as you let go of the mudra, and then just put your right hand in your left, thumb tips touch comfortably in the lap. Keep focusing at the third eye point and let the breath settle. And inhale deep. Hold. See yourself in a sphere of light, phosphorescently bright, clear, pure light. And exhale. And relax. Very good.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really enjoyed that.
Pleasure.
There is something just about doing these practices with others. It just kind of, you have this sort of sense of collective energy. And what I'm kind of feeling into is sort of one of the things that I really appreciate about Kundalini Yoga is that there's a lot of exercises that do stimulate the navel center and the heart center as well. And in the yogic tradition, there's this sense of kind of that the navel and the heart chakra are the main ones that kind of generate our pranic field or pranamaya kosha or our kind of basic energy field. So it really sort of strengthen your sense of kind of sort of in the groundedness, sort of health in the here and now. So that's really, really kind of wonderful thing. Yeah, which we all need, because a lot of us do feel sometimes, you know, this is an age where there's a lot of stress, and having that, what you were saying before, that kind of keeping up energy is sometimes it's really useful to sort of do more work with the navel chakra and things, just to have that momentum, to keep that momentum in our lives.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's rather like Kundalini view of the navel point is that it's sort of it's your physical center of gravity first off. So it's actually it's a literal center that needs to be honored, needs to be properly balanced. It's the place where the fire element is based in the body, and the fire element is the energy of transformation. And therefore, it's rather like from a spiritual perspective, every thought, every action, every deed is all part of our journey of transformation. And so the more conscious it is, then of course the better, the more effective we're likely to be in doing whatever it is we do in life. And that projection from the third chakra needs to balance a projection from the third eye, and then we've got clear projection, higher triangle, clear projection, lower triangle. Then they can kind of mix and merge. And it's like you were just saying, well, the importance of the third chakra and the heart chakra is that it's like once we become like a devotee, a sadak, whatever you want to call us, an initiate, then it's rather like the journey becomes, how do we move from the lower triangle to the higher triangle? How do we move from the lower triangle into the heart? And this is a sort of this is a notion that the Aquarian age that we're now in resonates with the energy of the heart. The Piscean age that we just left resonated with the energy of the third chakra. The energy of the third chakra, in a negative sense, is all about kind of acquisition, ownership, power. The energy of the heart chakra is about caring, sharing, loving, cultivating compassion. So we've gone from one to the other. Very nice. But does it feel like that? Well, not really. If we look at a newspaper or watch the news now, particularly in the world, what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing a classic third chakra Piscean style authoritarian grab for absolute authority. And this, in my view, this is rather like the Piscean candle is burning out, and just before the candle extinguishes, you get this kind of flash flame. And I think that's what's going on politically in the world right now.
One of the kind of the interesting things that I kind of wanted to bring in, and maybe this is also kind of like part of my journey in a way, because I do notice within myself this kind of tension between sort of sensuality, but also a sort of more aesthetic kind of detached form of spirituality in some way. And one of the things that you find within traditions like Kundalini, which is part of a sort of tantric tradition, and it is part of that, is that there's this way of sort of honoring the energy of the lower chakras as well. Of the energy of the lower chakras are kind of ideally brought onto the path in a way that maybe in some other Piscean traditions are not so explicitly there in a way. And I remember, I think it was Carl Jung sort of said that he wanted to bring a kind of a vitality of spirit back to the world in a way that people would have like the energy that a fish has that migrates across the entire, the entire globe just to get back to their mating ground or something like that. And sometimes, when you go, so there's that sense of wanting to have that, but I'm also aware of, I don't know, like a kind of I would call this, and I don't want to be judgmental, like a sort of naivety sometimes around these kind of issues. I was with a young guy recently, and he said he thought that all of the wars that were going on in the world was to do with like suppression of anger and the sexual drive, and what we need to do is we just need to liberate these energies. And I was thinking, well, okay, we need to liberate them. I was thinking this, we need to liberate them, but also, like we we don't just like, we don't want to become just hedonistic, like kind of a
Yeah,
pleasure seeking, kind of only relating to the physical world and touch, and just like
that's right.
there are things that say some of the older, maybe you could say more Piscean traditions like Buddhism, that saw the energies of anger and desire as being something to kind of transmute,
Mm.
not just something to liberate, like not just something to like liberate. But yeah, so I'm just kind of curious about that as an area, how to kind of not overly suppress these energies, how to work with them, but at the
Yeah,
same time not becoming like crazy hedonistic type people.
yeah, exactly. Um, well, I think it is about, you use the word transmutation. Um, uh, I mean, my interpretation of this is that as human beings, we experience human emotion, and some of those emotions are attached to, if you like, our biological makeup and biological urges and so on. Um, and if you like, the rishis and yogis who put the systems together totally understood that um, those emotions and sort of the activities connected to them um, could, on the one hand, um, uh, be effectively placed within certain relationships, if you like, where they work perfectly. Um, and can be expressed in a way that's appropriate. I think they all pretty much agree that repression and suppression is simply ineffective. It doesn't work. You create a kind of plutonic, volcanic energy that is going to erupt at the wrong point and create havoc. And we've seen this in the kind of the Me Too movement. We saw it in the yoga Me Too movement. We see it time and time again in in religions where you get these kind of huge scandals, and they're all about an inability to redirect, transmute the energies of the lower triangle. So chakras 1, 2, and 3, really, we're talking about power, sex, money.
Mm.
And these are the ingredients of any good political scandal. Yeah. And it's rather like people simply are not taught how to handle those kinds of energies in a way that's creative and effective. It's rather like if the second chakra is all about creativity, which it is, the second chakra is always about human sexuality. And whether you're part of a spiritual movement that says, well, no, we're going to redirect all that energy for higher purpose, well, fantastic if it works. But if it doesn't work, then, well, we see the results all too often.
Mm. I'm not sure if it's a historical thing, but that's often the way there's the word for the second chakra, Swadhisthana chakra, is sometimes translated as your own dwelling place in a way. I'm not sure if I'm correct on this, but the way I interpret that is to mean on whatever level of consciousness you're working at, that energy will always be functioning somehow. It will
That's right.
always be there. You will always be like your dwelling. It will always be kind of functioning somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I really like that sense of kind of transmutation, not getting into kind of just polarization, not getting into massive suppression, which then just, as you say, just explodes in some form. That tends to be what happens. Um, yeah, so for the time that we have kind of the remaining, we could do another practice, or is there something also that you would just want to bring, Guru Dharam, that you're particularly inspired by at the moment? You kind of want to bring
Um,
to the
I hadn't heard the name of your podcast until you introduced it, which I think you
uh,
said was Soul Remembering.
yeah,
Is that right? Soul
yeah, yeah,
Remembering.
yeah,
Well, there we are. You see, that's such a beautiful notion that the the soul journey, which we see as a series of sort of interlocking reincarnations, that each one depending on what we got up to in the previous ones. But that in order to, if you like, create a better world and a better life, it's rather like the remembrance of what we did and acceptance of it, good or bad, so that we can then kind of move on and redirect some of that energy, is sort of, you know, implicit in the title, which I think is great, because it's rather like the situation that we're seeing now with increased division is leading to, as the polarity extends farther and farther and farther, what's happening is that the central energy can no longer hold, and that is pretty soon going to collapse. And when that collapses, then the, you know, positive and negative, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, dictator and democrat models, they're going to both fall, and then there's going to be a reformation. And at that time, that is when you and me and all of our listeners, we need to be able to self-generate that place and that space of inner stillness, inner peace, inner connection, so that we can, you know, do whatever it is we need to do. So I think, you know, for me, the sort of people who espouse new consciousness, which essentially, of course, is ancient consciousness, we're all kind of holding that energy and that light, and that is essentially what is going to be much needed in the very near future.
Wonderful. I feel that's almost like a prayer for all of us. Maybe we should just sit for a minute of silence, just honoring what the beautiful intention, but also kind of the way, the path in a way Guru Dharam just expressed as a way to close the time together. But thank you so much for Guru Dharam coming along. I've really, really enjoyed our time together.
My pleasure, me too.
And there will also be links, of course, in the video, so you can connect more to Guru Dharam's work and the amazing things that he's doing.